That was radicalissimo, man.
All we are saying is give it the chance. My, but that takes me back to my days as a fledgling. What a blessed gathering.
Mavis, when you flew up on top of that giant oil barrel and did the do dance, I thought the pigs were going to go nuts.
That's not a very respectful way to talk about the police, Charlie.
Oink, 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 oink.
I wasn't talking about the police. I was talking about the pigs, man. The pigs. Porkers for a pollution-free planet?
My bad.
Ironic, really. Pigs fighting against pollution, since the production of meat represents a heavy burden on the environment.
It's like they are protesting themselves out of even being born. Goodbye, livestock. Goodbye, piggy wiggies. Thought they were supposed to be smart. Sheesh.
But the vibe, astral, baby, astral.
It is as if we are all catching a wave. Investment firms pulling out of big oil, a national carbon tax.
Prince Harry and Meghan Markle peeling around California in their Audi e-tron 55. Hey, anybody hungry? Marches and protests, man. Appetite enablers. We still have some leftover spider pate from your pre-migration party, Mavis. Or would you prefer caramel wood tick ice cream?
You know I am a sucker for ice cream.
Chucky?
We have any of that chicha left over from our winter solstice Inti Raymi celebration?
Coming right up.
I am very pleased that you were able to join us this year, Mavis. I know it has been a tough year for the songbird community with the deaths by neonic insecticides.
Hey, farmer, put away your DDT now. Give me spots on my apples, believe me, the birds and the bees. Please,
don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you got till it's gone. They paved paradise and put up a parking lot. They paved paradise and put up a parking lot. They paved paradise and put up a parking lot.
That hits the spot. I love the crunchy exoskeleton bits. Something I can sink my beak into.
Hagen bugs! Creamy goodness from pupae to plate.
So fancy.
Only the best for our Mavis bird.
Absolutely, and always. I almost left a calcium carbonate deposit in my shorts when the yellow beanie Gould squad showed up. Things got heated there for a bit.
And where were the pigs, I'd like to know?
You mean the PFA, PFP?
Not the anti-pollution pigs, the other pigs, the police. Did you see how some of them walked right up to the yellow beanies and struck up a conversation? Like they were old friends.
Shame on them. I felt like doing a doo-doo dive bomb flyby. I was so steamed.
We want the police to create stability and make us feel safe. But then you see evidence of them almost aiding and abetting the rabble-rousers.
That's true. We weren't doing anything, just listening to speeches and chanting.
And pooping on giant oil barrels.
And pooping on giant oil barrels. Man, this whole planet is in such a mess. Sheesh.
Disheartening.
Discouraging.
Dum, 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 dum.
We all think that this destruction of the environment is a new story, but it's as old as we are. The second humans started to move out of Africa.
I love that movie. The scene where Robert Redford is washing Meryl Streep's hair on safari.
Oh, when she takes her whip to the lioness that is threatening her cattle. Chills up and down my pneumatized body.
Sorry?
Some of my bones are filled with air instead of marrow, so they are lighter in order to fly.
Mother Nature, astounding. But I was not talking about a movie. I was talking about the fact that not long after humans left Africa, wherever they went, within a short period of time, almost all of the big animals were gone, overhunted.
That's an old idea and not completely uncontested. When humans arrived on the scene and the earth was already heating up in the larger bodies that had evolved to handle the cold.
Might have begun to shrink, yes, but lots of evidence still points to overhunting.
Ancient? Ouch.
Okay, let's take a very up-to-date example if the ancient world seems too remote. Smartphones use around 70 of the 83 stable and non-radioactive elements in the entire periodic table and 62 different types of metals. Even though they are found in minute amounts, they still have to be dug up, processed, shipped, and manufactured.
Like the mineral coltan and the Congo Basin and the destruction of gorilla habitat, just so we can yak, 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 surf, 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 and click, click, click. Sheesh! What? I watch Animal Planet too, you know.
One round trip from London to Australia uses up all the good done by 20 years of recycling.
20 years for one trip? I think I'm gonna be sick.
My flights to Marrakesh and back don't do any damage. Okay, if I have too many Eulotus manipulatus beetle margaritas, I get awful gas. Methane. But I can't resist that buttery, salty, sweet flavor. I know they're not good for me, but at my age, who cares?
There is a controversial idea, and that is a return to rationing, like they did in the World Wars.
Rationing! Look how hard it was to get people to wear masks and follow COVID guidelines. And you're talking one for you and one for me.
It's either that, or it could be none for you and none for me. Sheesh.
The oasis near my condo in Marrakesh is now a giant sandbox, and the heat wasn't like that when Yves Saint Laurent and Andy Warhol made it the place to be in the 1960s. The air was sweet with the je ne sais quoi of Mary Jane. I used to float through the season on a gentle, non-judgmental cloud. Now you have the likes of David and Victoria Beckham and that brood of tiny consumers and that Bono creature. Meryl Streep is, of course, always welcome.
Oh, speaking of welcome, can you get that, Charlie? Probably Mr. Moderator. He was going to drop off some of the extra signs from the rally.
What did your last servant die of?
You.
Just put the signs down here in the hallway, Em.
Hi, all. Hey, Mavis. Boy, it's good to see you. You know how much I love you. And boy, that was a great shot on that oil barrel, Mavis.
Why, thank you, young man.
I thought the yellow babies were going to go crazy. What a crowd, eh? What a day. So much excitement. And I haven't seen that much tie-dye since my youth.
It's making a comeback. Something about nostalgia being good for our mental health.
Well, just as long as they stay away from corduroy overalls. I got the pictures to prove it.
H&M, Zara.
The Bay.
Oh, brother. Hey, you got any more of those chichas? I'm parched.
Don't worry, I'll get it.
We were discussing Mavis's scatological antics, the rally, things of that nature. We had just reached a rather depressing impasse at the collective mess we have gotten ourselves into.
Blue. Songs are like tattoos. You know I've been to see before.
Thanks, Charlie. Well, everyone, cheers to old friends. And cheers to old Mother Earth, and maybe she survived the malaise of humanity.
Salud!
Isahatika.
Huh?
Cheers in Arabic. One in Marrakesh, darling.
You always were a cunning linguist, Mavis. Cheers!
As much as I'd like to stick around and chew the fat with you folks, I have another Hear and Be Heard 10 community conversations to host. And tonight's conversation is called One for You and One for Me. And we're going to be looking and focusing on the idea of rationing and a way to preserve and get more equitable distribution, if you will, of the world's very limited resources.
We were just talking about that a little while ago, weren't we, Chucky?
Yup, sounds very interesting, Mr. Moderator.
Well, I'm sure it will be. Lots of meat on the old environmental bone.
Cattle are being developed that give off less methane. Animal Planet.
Why not just produce and eat less beef?
Well, it's a step at least. And anyway, I got to get going. So we'll talk to you again soon. And it was great seeing you, Mavis Bird. Why don't you fly over to my place sometime and we'll have a proper visit, eh? Come on, you little cutie.
Remember, Maud, my boy, spread the love far and wide.
You take care, Mavis. And thanks, Charlie. And see you, Chucky. We'll see you all next month.
I know I shouldn't, but is there any more of that ice cream left?
Eating like a bird, eh, Mavis?
I have to eat 1/4 to 1/2 of my body weight each and every day just to keep myself in tip-top flying shape. So enough of this chatter. Let's go get some grub.
Come to think of it, I think there's still some curried grub korma left over.
Yummy!
I knew that, by the way, the thing about Mavis needing to eat a lot.
Animal Planet.
Yep.
Bye. It's so good. It's so good to have Mavis back in the nest. Those long, cold winters without her cheery sound and great voice. But like all the times before, Hear and Be Heard 10 Community Conversations is co-hosted by Red Deer Public Library and the Red Deer Puppetry Collective.
Yeah!
As we just saw in our lively discussion between Chalk and Cheese and Mavis Bird, we're kind of in an environmental pickle at the moment. In a few moments, I'm going to introduce you to our guests for this evening's conversation. But right now, before we do it, I'm just going to give you a bit more of a background to help set the stage for the conversation. Rationing in World War II was implemented here in Canada, as well as the UK, the United States, New Zealand, and Australia. Now at home in Canada, meat and dairy, milk, cheese, coffee, tea, and sugar were all part of the rationing and on that list. In Canada, rationing started in 1942 and carried on till 47. And in Britain, it started in 1940 and went on till 1954. So they had 14 years of very strict rationing. And by the end of the war, Canadian exports accounted for 57% of the wheat and flour, 39% of bacon, 24% of cheese, and 15% of eggs consumed in Britain. So you can imagine that we sent a tremendous amount of food over to the great, to Britain. So you might say, why are we talking about rationing and talking about the war? And what does this have to do with our environmental crisis? Well, is this not a war we're fighting in a sense? And the real challenge is the fact that we, all of us, are the enemy and we're contributing to the destruction of the planet each and every day. And so some of us more than others, but we're all doing it. So now how do we combat it and how do we tie it in with the idea of rationing? So joining me this evening are three wonderful, passionate Red Deerians who are going to help us parse this idea and sort it through. You can see them all, their lovely faces on the Zoom, on the video. So we're going to go and we'll start with Blair Coswin. So she's first up. So Blair in 2020 founded Green Deer Sustainable Hub here in Red Deer as a youth organization.
She was inspired by the lack of information that she experienced growing up in Red Deer, and the organization aims at promoting educational awareness on sustainability and living a sustainable lifestyle. So Blair, welcome, welcome. So to start things off, once you unmute yourself, why don't you tell me a bit about your passion for sustainability and how you got started, and even more specifically, why youth?
Thanks, Matt. So it really started pretty early. I remember in elementary school learning a little bit, like there was a environment club, but it was more about recycling and turning off the lights. And I remember in grade 5, we watched An Inconvenient Truth, and that just really hit me close to home. And it was just like, wow, okay, we're in this huge crisis, and it's the first time I've heard of it. And then I didn't really end up hearing about it again until I went to university and left Red Deer. So when I went to university for my degree, I started hearing about sustainability more and the environment. And so I ended up switching from accounting to natural resources, energy, and the environment. And I also got a certificate in sustainability because it was just something it hit home to me. And so I really started educating myself and learning more and more and just becoming more and more passionate. And it's a place I never thought I would go because, again, I was going to go into accounting. And then for my certificate in sustainability, we had to do a project to get our certificate. And I didn't want to just do a project and then get it done and over with. I wanted something that would have a lasting impact. And I just couldn't figure out what to do. And then I realized, like, in Red Deer, what we're missing is when I was a youth, I didn't hear about sustainability much. So why not help to fix that problem? So that's why I founded Green Deer Sustainability Hub, is because I found that there was just this missing part of growing up about learning about the environment, especially since we're so oil field dependent in Red Deer. And so I wanted to target youth specifically because, like, there is Rethink Red Deer, which is more broad. But I wanted that specific youth target just because I found that it was lacking.
Nice, great, thanks, Blair. That's a good start. Good for you being brave to be the first one to open your cute mouth. Okay, Hope, let's go to you. Hope is a 4th-year BA in Environment and Urban Sustainability student, and she hopes to continue her education this fall at SAIT for Environmental Technology. Now, her background focuses on meeting the needs of the present without compromising the needs for future generations. So it's a good cause for rationing, if you ask me, if there ever was one. So, Hope, can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to become an activist and to study urban sustainability? And further to that, how do you feel your studies are going to help move us forward in our fight for a more sustainable planet?
Thank you. Well, similarly to Blair, my sustainability journey did start off in pretty young, but not as young as Blair. In high school, I was looking for something a little bit bigger to focus on, something that I thought was bigger than myself, and that was collective action, and the environment really interested me. And that led me into my studies in sustainability, and specifically urban sustainability. And with cities growing at a rapid pace, that's where people are going. Even Red Deer is considered a city. So I think studying how cities work, cities operate, how they get their resources, and what we're spending our resources on is something really important to remember and really look into. So specifically, I think sustainability goes hand in hand with any environmental training and environmental practices, just because a lot of our resources are finite, and we need to choose what we do with those resources very carefully. Yeah, specifically water, if we're thinking about Canada, Canada is very grateful. We do have the most accessible fresh water in the world, and I think we do often take that for granted. I know we've all left the tap running, we've all taken baths, and if we are talking about rationing, that's something that we can all focus on a little bit and maybe reduce our use for that.
Right, good. Thank you. Sarah Grass is next. So Sarah moved to Red Deer from New Brunswick in 2013, and since coming here, she's been developing her passions for nature and creativity and community building. And she's been working with Rethink Red Deer. That's what Blair, mentioned before. She's been with Rethink Red Deer since 2017. And she's interested in the concept of rewilding and urban agriculture. Okay, welcome, Sarah. So here's your first little question. So tell us a little bit about your journey from and through creativity to environmentalism, and a little bit about rewilding and urban agriculture. Some people might not really understand what that means, rewilding, and how you think as well that ties in with our theme this evening.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Matt. And thanks for that fun puppet presentation. That was great. Yeah, so I grew up in Fredericton, New Brunswick, which is traditional Wolastoqey territory. And I grew up in the same city as my grandparents, so I was really fortunate to get to spend time with them on their property. It's kind of like what you would consider an acreage out here. So because they lived through World War II and they lived through rationing, they definitely made use of everything, and they had a garden as well as composting. So I was exposed to things like that pretty early on. So I think that was important in my journey. And I was also fortunate to study fine arts for my university practice, which really helped me to develop my creativity and also just explore what I was interested in. And that led me to an understanding that what I was really interested in was this relationship between humans and the natural world. And then, unfortunately, then an understanding that we really don't have a healthy relationship with the natural world right now. So that led me to want to learn more about solutions and what I could do. And I really just felt a need to do something. And so after moving to Red Deer, I found this organization, Rethink Red Deer, which is a nonprofit that was incorporated in 2010. And so it's focused on sustainability and on really helping people to understand what are those solutions that we can do in our own backyard. So some of those things are like rewilding and urban agriculture. So that would be just, growing food in your space rather than just having a lawn. You can make use of the space that you have, even if it's just a small patio. And also with rewilding, I guess I think about native plants and like forests and these wild ecosystems that we have here in this parkland and prairie ecosystem. So you can bring plants like that into your landscape, and they're really good at holding water and bringing in bees and beneficial insects. So we've lost a lot of that through development. So yeah.
Well, isn't there also, thanks. Isn't there also a Japanese approach where they're taking and creating these micro forests in cities and centers and stuff? I'd read about it on the internet, and so they find that an astounding number of bugs and animals even begin to come back, and sort of that bit of rewilding. I know that in Scandinavia, they're really big on it, in Denmark and stuff. And this goes a little bit to Hope and your discussion around sustainability, which then means sort of rewilding and giving back in a sense. So that's great, you three. Thanks for that wonderful kickoff. So one of the ideas that I stumbled upon while preparing for this conversation was the elephant in the room that no one seems to want to talk about really, and that's overpopulation. So some estimates would suggest that by 2100, so less than 100 years away, there will be between 9 and 11 billion people on the planet. It's also been suggested that we really don't know how many people the planet can support, because the planet has never seen this many people at one time living, right? So we aren't really sure. But some would say that it's the raw numbers are not the issue, but it's rather the fact of our consumption. So one suggestion I read from a global study suggested that a population of 1.024 billion people is what the planet could handle, but they didn't say whether or not it means we're all consuming absolutely everything we can, or we're preserving or being careful. So a question I'd like to ask each of you from your perspectives to give me a thought on this idea. And it's not, but on this idea that the only one we face is too many people, and if we get rid of a lot of them, the problem is solved, right? So let's say we have this many, now we go to this many, it's all solved and we can do whatever we want. So think about that for a second. And Sarah, let's start with you to get a sense of this idea of population and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, sure. Well, I don't have any children at the moment, but it didn't really factor into my decision too much, I guess. I think it's still important that we're raising our kids to take care of the environment and to be good stewards of the land. So I'm not really sure. I don't know if I have an answer to what we should do about overpopulation, but I also think there's many different ways to be in relationship and to be in family nowadays, that it's not necessary to have a traditional nuclear family and to have kids. So, whatever you want to do, I think is right. And I think there are a lot of people that don't want to have kids, and there are people that do. So yeah, I guess I have hope that it will balance itself out. Maybe I'm a little too optimistic.
Well, I think one of the questions too is that in some countries like India, and we know that in China has the one-child policy, which they're stepping away from now. But countries that are, say, more impoverished, et cetera, really struggle with this idea of fertility and numbers of babies that are being born. So Blair, let's go to you on that. I know you could be the youngest of the gang. See what you sort of think about this idea about overpopulation and numbers of people.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because you have a lot of people in the environmentalist community that have pledged never to have children just because of overpopulation. Right. And so it's a sustainable choice not to have children and not to contribute to overpopulation. But I think that's not realistic for everyone to do that, because if it's just not feasible. So I think you really need to watch the consumption. So really research what you're buying and what you're throwing away. So one thing that you could do is put all your waste for that week, keep it in a plastic bag, just so you can visualize how much you threw away that week. So that way you can become more aware of how much you do throw away and make plans to cut back on that. Another thing that I like to do is I like to research sustainable materials. So I recently had to get a new toothbrush, and so I didn't want to buy another plastic toothbrush. Right. So I decided to get a bamboo toothbrush, and because bamboo is a sustainable material and it takes way less water than paper does. Bamboo is just honestly a really great material. They can make so many things out of it. So I really try to get bamboo or hemp alternatives, and just making sure I do my research, because there's a lot of, especially since it's Earth Month, there's a lot of greenwashing going on where they're like, oh, this is super sustainable. But then you look into it and you're like, is it though? Because you like, for example, H&M, they're like, oh, we're being really sustainable. We're like doing all these things, and they say all that, but they're, in the end, they're still fast fashion. So really, how sustainable are you? And so it's just really, you can't take what companies say as truth. You have to really dig into that. And there actually are apps to help with that. So you don't have to do all the research yourself, but just being aware.
Nice, good, good. Okay, Hope, overpopulation.
So I have actually studied a little bit about population specifically and the concept of overpopulation. So I would like to challenge the idea that in an ideal situation, when we look at the facts, we see that as quality of life increases, the level of population decreases. And this is why a lot of developed countries have really strong immigration policies, because without immigrants, our economy would not make it. At least people in Canada are not having children. And this isn't mainly because of people being worried about the environment. It's about just cost of children and cost of children in the developed world. And as you increase the quality of life, when we do see the amount of children being born in these countries, it's not that much. So the best thing we can do to combat overpopulation is actually to bring up the quality of life in these developing countries. That is the best tool. So I would actually like, obviously you don't have to take my word for it, please do your own research on that, but that is what the research is saying. And I think that is our best tool. And I think that goes back to rationing, that goes back to taking care of our environment, because we can support the people on this planet. It's just getting the resources to those people. So.
Well, and no, that's a good point, because I'd actually read, in fact, it's funny you're saying that, because my next comment was the fact, what about the idea of raising women up and educating them? And according to the UN Population Fund, 350 million women in the poorest countries did not want their last child, but they had no way for birth control or to prevent that pregnancy. So then we begin to say, an article I read today from the BBC was saying that, guess what? This idea of population really stems on, as Hope was suggesting, raising women up and giving them their rights and their education. And I know, for example, that in Brazil, they have soap operas, and people are crazy for these soap operas in Brazil. And in Brazil, in the soap operas, you often have women who are very powerful and they're very strong and they're lawyers and doctors and whatever. And it's quite aspirational for people in these poorer communities to watch them. But these women in the soap operas who are wealthy and beautiful and whatever, often have very small families. And so what's happened literally in Brazil is that the women are saying, sorry, the factory doors are closed. We aren't producing anymore. And so my understanding is that the population in Brazil, in some ways, through this inadvertent education that came from these soap operas, is changing things. So I think you're right. I know the population question is a really challenging one on all kinds of levels. So anybody else have a final sort of thought on that, now that we've raised women's rights and everybody's ready to take over the world, which is my choice, that's for sure.
Well, I do have one other thing to add about that, including women's rights. I think it's also important to look at labor power. So when you do look at these developing countries, a lot of what they sell is their labor power. So by having 10 children, you've created a massive labor power for your family, which means more income, better resources coming in. They can take care of their parents. And then when those children have children, now your family has so much labor power to offer, it's more income bringing into the house. And when you're worried about food for the day, you're less worried about the environmental consequences that you are putting onto the planet. So all those things come in together.
Well, doesn't that tie it in right back around to the idea of equitable and sharing and saying, you know, this just doesn't work, and we have to find a way somehow for this. So we've looked at a couple of issues so far, and this leads, oddly enough, right into the next sort of comment and then question that I have. So one of the biggest issues is the disparity between the haves and the have-nots. So we know that the fact of the consumption in people in richer countries is very different from that in lower countries. And I've read that to get more equity regarding our carbon footprint for each of us, people in the richer countries like Canada and the US would need to reduce their footprints by something like 60%, where an average Chinese citizen can sort of stay where they are, and a citizen of the country of India could literally double their consumption to give them some kind of a quality of life. So, and that's just for now, but as the poorer countries, see, one of the questions is when the poorer countries become more middle class and therefore they become more aspirational and they want to have the things that we have and take for granted, in some ways, where does this stop and end, right? It becomes very challenging. So obviously we have an addiction to affluence in our part of the world. So what do you think, each of you, would think that it would take to get us over our addiction of affluence? And I'm going to throw this up in the open and you can throw your hand up. Who wants to start that? So it's the question around how do we get over our addiction to affluence? Okay, I think I saw Blair's hand go up. Good.
I think that we really, as individuals, we should really hold these large corporations accountable, because it is like them who are producing these plastic, unsustainable products. And we as individuals, if we join together, we have this huge voice. And so we can change the products that we buy to be more sustainable. So it's not so much, I think, about affluence, it's just how things are produced, just capitalism in general, really, and just changing the way that things are. I think this is a very broken system. And so holding these corporations accountable, making products more sustainable, and just really thinking about future generations and how we want it to look, because continuing plastic consumption is just getting out of control.
Isn't part of, though, what this leads to, I think, Blair, your statement is that we live in a world where the role of advertising and these products is to create a want or a need that we never had before. I never needed a cherry pitter. I mean, and that's a stupid example, because actually I do. I have a cherry tree and I need the cherry pitter. Anyway, the point is that these things we don't even know exist, we suddenly want, and then we turn that want into a need, and therefore we buy it and we say, I cannot live without 3 bathrooms in my house and there are only 3 people who live there, for example, right? Mm-hmm. So I like the idea of taking the corporations to task, but how might that be managed? Because we are addicted. I know I'm addicted, and I'm saying it out loud and not very proudly, but I'm saying that I'm caught on this thing. I'm a collector, I'm a builder, I'm a snob on a certain level, right? So anyway, let's keep on that. Either Hope or Sarah jump in. Sarah, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think rationing might actually be a good way, like something to introduce that might help with that, because when you only have so much, then you have to learn how to make do. And I mean, I enjoy those kinds of challenges. I know not everyone does, but I think maybe if we had to make do with a little bit less, then it would start that mindset of, well, how can we create more and how can we grow our own food? Like the concept of a victory garden, which was introduced in World War I and II, which was something really important during the war, because it gave people something to do, but also gave people the opportunity to grow more healthy food at home. And it has physical benefits and mental benefits as well. Yeah.
And Hope.
Yeah, so in regards to the carbon footprint thing, I'm not sure if you guys have ever done your carbon footprint calculator online. And I'm a vegetarian, and I would say I'm pretty conscious of what I buy. And I remember doing mine and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna get 1 earth. I'm gonna get 1 earth or 2 max. And I got 4.5. And I was shocked because I would assume I'm pretty conscious, and I guess I'm not. So I think it goes to show that we need to be doing a little bit more, especially here in North America. We buy a lot of things that we might not necessarily need, or we're convinced that we need it. Just like the cherry pitter, right? Like it's like, oh, I need this cherry pitter.
Well, I do actually, please, I do.
Well, we're convinced, and a lot of things like technology, like I would say my watch, I can't live without my watch.
Right.
In reality, I definitely could. And when we take into account what we use versus what we really need, I think it's important to be a conscious consumer in that regard.
I used to work on cruise ships, which is a terrible industry for all kinds of environmental levels. This was a long time ago. And my hotel director told me that I had to change shoes. I worked with young people. I was the director of the kids program. And he said, okay, you've got to buy some different shoes for the evening because I don't like those ones. So we got off in St. Thomas in the Caribbean, and I walked to the only department store, and there were literally only 2 styles of shoes that would have been possible. So I made my decision in like 5 seconds. It's going to be this shoe, and that's the only shoe that I had, and that's the only shoe that was available. And it made do, and my decision was very easy to make. I was very happy with it because it wasn't me going into a store and finding 500 styles of jeans and having to choose one and always be told that each one is going to be more perfect than the next, and one's going to make my ass look fantastic and the other, you know, all of those kinds of things, right, that we believe. So this, it's so pernicious, and yet I know that we're all suffering from it. Yeah, so let's move on to maybe another thought. We're getting lots of great comments, but I can't talk to y'all and try to read them. Okay, so we look at things. So Hope mentioned something about water a little while ago, right? And enough food. So as a human right, water and food, we think that's a no-brainer. It's a right. We need it to live and survive, right? So, for example, in Zanzibar, resort hotels and guest houses on 3 coastal villages consume 180 to 850 gallons of water per room per day, while the community households have access to just 25 gallons per day for all of their reasons. So you know that in a hotel, it's just a toilet and a shower and a sink. You're not cooking, you're not making any food. And then in Kerala, in southern India, you know, they've got those houseboats that ply the beautiful canals in the southern part of India. And so they take tourists through there, and the canals are spewing literally crap, the human crap from the guests, and oil and filth and stuff, and the fish taste like kerosene. So this idea of how we share it, again, it keeps coming back to this same thing, is a very thorny question. So how do we begin to look at this idea of equity? And aren't we always bumping up to the idea of capitalism and for-profit economies? So we can see, for example, how the market resources towards those who have money and unmet wants, but not towards those who have unmet needs. So my question to throw up in the air to all of you is, how do we turn this boat around? Now, I know we're not going to solve it all tonight, but let's get a start, shall we? Anybody want to jump in?
Sure, I'll jump in.
Okay, Hope, you go ahead.
Well, my uncle, who has actually worked in Africa, told me a story just like that, that these people, when they get the water, they have to use it to bathe, they have to use it to cook, they have to use it to clean, they have to use it for everything, and it's just one pot of water per se. Obviously it's big, and it's expensive. So when you make the cost of living so expensive, it does become a humanitarian crisis. When you say you have to travel all this time with this water, and then when you get there, that's all the water you have.
Yeah.
Or food, these basic human rights that in Canada, we're so lucky to not really have to deal with as much. Obviously, there's poverty in Canada that does need to be dealt with. We consume at a rate that is unprecedented. And I think Canada, we love to say we're not as bad as the States. I think a lot of us are guilty of that, when we're basically just as bad, especially for creating waste and consuming water. Canadians consume a lot of water. And although we're lucky to have it, fresh water can very easily be turned to gray water. Right. And gray water, which if anyone is viewing doesn't know, gray water is water that has already been used and now has to be repurposed because of the lack of available water, which would often be wastewater, which is what Matt was talking about just now. And the water that gets spewed out from these ships, a lot of places they don't have a choice and they have to use this gray water again, whether that's drinking it just like that or it going through a sanitary process for consumption. But it's something that we definitely need to talk about and really get to the bottom of, because I don't think someone's cruise ship travel time is as important as someone's accessible water use. Right.
Well, and then of course the capitalists would then say, well, look at all the jobs we're giving to people on the cruise ship. You know, they think it's a trade-off, but it's a massively unfair trade-off, obviously. And because the 4 of us and everybody watching this are sitting in a place where, as you say, we can turn the taps on and let them run for 5 hours, right? And I might say, oops, I forgot to turn the tap off, but that doesn't mean I have nothing to cook my food in for a week, right? So, Sarah, let's go to you for a thought on how we can turn this boat around.
Yeah, well, I definitely think that clean, fresh water should be a priority for everyone to be able to access that. And I guess one thing that comes to mind is rainwater harvesting. And this is being done on a huge scale in Australia. They, like, most of the water that they use is from rainwater, and they consider it quite safe to drink, the way that they do this. So I think we're a little bit behind here in Canada on rainwater harvesting, and there's a lot that we have to learn, but the information is there now. So I think, yeah, it's really important that we're using the resources that are there, actually just falling from the sky and not letting them just go into the storm drains.
Well, you know, in Bermuda, they have these roofs and the houses that are shaped like this, with sort of steps down, and they're covered with white limestone. And they all have cisterns in their house because they don't have a lot of water on Bermuda. So the water goes down and the limestone filters it and cleans it, and then it goes into giant cisterns. They have to be very careful, and they're very conscious of it, but that's a system that's been there for several centuries for a way to you know, capture that water. Blair.
Yeah, sorry, just the whole time that we're talking about this, I just can't stop thinking about like how we're talking about all these other countries that don't have a lot of water or have this food insecurity, but First Nations here, there's still a lot that don't have water, and food insecurity in the north is such a huge, huge problem. But I also want to point out, I went to the Philippines, and we stayed at my boyfriend's communal family house, and we had to drip from the tap because the water pressure was so poor, and fill up this big tub to shower. And so we couldn't have a shower right after each other. We'd have to wait like an hour for it to fill up again. And so you really are aware of how much water you use. And like coming here, you just let the water run while you're like doing your shampoo and all that. But like there, you're just pouring it with a bucket. So obviously you only use what you're pouring. And so I think if we just really need to be aware of what we use. And same with like food waste. Like we throw out so much food waste. And so instead of say throwing out all these like vegetable scraps, there's ways you can use them, like broths and stuff like that. And so I think it's just, we need that alternative way of thinking instead of thinking of how wasteful it is. It's like, how can we use this? Because I know of other people who said, well, when I shower and you need, like, you got to run the water for it to warm up, collect that water for your plants. And so it's just rethinking that, oh, it's not waste. How can I use that?
Well, actually, this, again, you folks are so perfect because you're leading me to the next question and the next comment, because in World War II, back to the UK and in the United States, I don't know this about Canada, but when rationing was first introduced, it was on more of a volunteer basis. So someone could say, well, I'll only buy that pound of butter and I'll do that for the team, right? And it wasn't very effective. And it's proved through studies now that it's still not effective, that this voluntary approach is just not working. And in fact, the people in United Kingdom and the United States in World War II demanded that the government become more strict and regulate all of this stuff, because what's showing up in the human race is that even though we aren't happy when these restrictions are imposed upon us, we use fairness as a big guide. So if I know that Hope and Blair and Sarah only gets to buy that 1 pound of butter, and that's the same thing as me, I may not like that I only have 1 pound of butter, but I know that everybody is only getting 1 pound of butter. So it's this idea of fairness, because fairness really is the carrot and the stick is the restrictions, right? So the carrot is we're all in this. So I want us to just jump into this pandemic and say, okay, how has this pandemic helped us in this regard? Because in many ways, this idea of restriction and giving up some things, sacrificing them for the greater good and for our society at large, in some ways is like rationing, right? So are we finding that from your perspective, the pandemic has been this positive thing because it says, okay, we have to put a stop on certain things? Are we seeing the total cracks in the system? And yet I know, how can we be motivated to act against this existential threat, which is the climate crisis, when we can't seem to get it together to beat the COVID? And the COVID's right here, because I know that our brains are made to function such that we are excellent at sensing an immediate threat. There's a saber-toothed tiger in the bushes. I've got to run. I've got to duck. All that kind of stuff, right? But someone says, oh, by the way, 20 years down the road, the Red Deer River is going to be dry. How do we even process it? We can't physiologically process it. And yet we're getting examples of this with the pandemic. So going back to the question, what do we think about how the pandemic has started to maybe give us examples and ways in which, yes, we can say we have to sacrifice some things for the greater good? Because that's what it boils down to, yeah? So, Sarah, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's definitely made us, it's shown that we can sacrifice some things, and some of those things like traveling do help contribute to mitigating climate change, but not enough, unfortunately. But it's just shown us what we can do on a global scale pretty quickly, that we can collaborate and work to solve these problems. But I don't know how to mobilize people on quite the same level, but at least we have an example now, and we all kind of know how it feels like living through this past year. Yeah, and again, I guess back to rationing, like we definitely saw at the beginning of last year all the stockpiling that was going on. Yes. And I think it would be nice to be able to combat that in the future when we have other things like this arise.
Well, do you think that can be sort of a reminder in a sense, because we know that we can't continue going as we are, and as you said, when we face a massive threat, the world literally from day 1 to day 2 stopped. We can do it. And we have the capacity to say, okay, this does not serve us and this is dangerous. But it's that existential feeling of that threat, which is kind of hard to get our heads around. So Blair or Hope, go ahead and we'll talk about the sense of maybe lessons we've learned from the pandemic, yes or no, optimism, pessimism.
I think we're having such a hard time in Alberta because we've always just been a province of prosperity. We've always done well, and so having such hard restrictions and such hard times is just difficult for people to grasp. But if you look at, say, Australia, they've been having these extremely intense lockdowns. Like one case pops up, lock everything down for 2 weeks, and they're able to resume to normality. And so I think it's just, we need to get out of the way of individualistic thinking, and we need to start thinking about other people. Like, I'm young. If I get it, I'll probably be okay, but I might pass it on to someone who doesn't. And so I want to do everything in my power to get rid of this virus, to be as safe as I can, because I'm thinking about other people. And so more people need to get in that mentality of doing what we can. And I'm all for super hard restrictions and just getting it done and over with, because dragging it out is so hard on these small businesses. And like a lot of people in the small businesses, they're like, I can't close. I'm going to go out of business. If I close, I won't reopen. And so I think we just need to really, just in the best interest of everyone, just sacrifice hardcore for like 2-3 weeks. So that way we could think of the bigger picture and like everyone, instead of just opening and closing. Like we need a better sense of community.
Right. I think it goes back to that idea of the collective, because it's easy for us to, as we said, we were talking about even First Nations reserves with no boiled water. Well, we're not there. I'm not living there. I'm not experiencing that. And it's very hard for us to get that greater sense of empathy, because that's what's needed. Because there are, I think last year, what was it, 1 million climate refugees already, and this is like 2020 or something. So yeah, I like that feeling of pulling together, because that in some ways, one for me, one for you, one for you, that becomes part of that, right? Hope, let's go to you and finish up with this one.
Well, I guess I have a little bit of a different opinion when it comes to COVID and the environment, because I think a lot of the time COVID is now being used as a band-aid to not talk about the climate crisis going on.
Right.
We're too busy, there's too many funds going on, we're too much invested in COVID right now. And I think it's very interesting, to say none the least, that there was no money for the climate crisis, but there's lots of money for other things. So that being said, there is a will. If there's a will, there's a way. And when the countries come together, they can do some incredible things. Just today, I was talking with my aunt about the Montreal Protocol, which literally happened so fast. There was a hole in the ozone layer. The world came together and said, we're going to fix this. They had the best scientists. They had the best studies. And they did it. We did it. We healed the ozone layer by really going in deep, and all as a collective, really solving the problem. So I think COVID is really showing the cracks in our systems and what we do. Like, I know in Toronto, for the first time, and I'm not too sure, maybe 100 years, the downtown core had the cleanest air it had ever had in the most recent future. And it was so interesting to see, like, there was no smog, there was no anything, it was just clean, breathable air. So I think it does show a little bit about what it is, but at the same time, I think COVID is being used a lot as a band-aid. Like, a lot of countries are opening back up their coffee stores for reusable cups, because there has been peer-reviewed studies coming out and saying the cups are not causing COVID. Obviously, if someone comes in with a filthy cup, deny them, which they always have. But there's really no correlation that shows reusable cups and COVID. And a lot of companies before COVID were ready to outright ban disposable single-use cups, or at least the really harsh ones. So, and now COVID has sort of thrown that out the window. So I think it's important that when we do go back, we're going back different.
Well, and my question would be, how can we ensure that's going to happen? Because you're right. Suddenly this thing hits, and there are billions / trillions of dollars being thrown around like that. And nobody bats an eye, because we're fighting this thing. But as you say, you go back to an environmental initiative, you say, let's stop pipelines, let's stop all that stuff that's dangerous and we know is wrong and it's bad. We can reinvent something. We can take Sarah's creative mind and throw it at this problem, right? Other artists that are looking at this and say, well, wait a minute, we don't have to look at it this way. We don't have to be trapped in this. I mean, it's exciting and exhausting at the same time, because we all know that this world of imbalance and the power and the money that's there, they don't want to move. They don't want to give it up. I mean, this is not a joke. When you're talking about the billionaires and the people like Jeff Bezos and stuff who made billions upon billions, well, you're going to suddenly say to them, well, give away 9/10 of it, because, you know, you only need $500 million. I mean, what is that, right? So it looks like we're getting close to wrap up, but I just want to say that in this short period of time, we certainly couldn't have covered all the bases, and we've just scraped the surface on this important thing, right? And I see this lovely passion and intelligence with the three of you and dedication, and, you know, makes me feel encouraged moving on for young people. So I want to leave you with this idea that came from a Canadian researcher named Peter Victor at the York University in Toronto. And he did some computer modeling up to 2035 of what a society that contracted in a fair and orderly way would look like. And he found that a negative growth economy would actually lead to deep reductions in unemployment, poverty rates, and overall debt. And he also said that greenhouse gas emissions would also decline steeply by as much as 80%. So this idea of contracting and having a negative growth society does all those things. And as Gandhi once said, the world has enough for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed. So that kind of, got me thinking. So this evening's conversation and the impetus for it was this 2013 book called Any Way You Slice It by Stan Cox. And there are also a ton of books at the library to look up, and you can navigate your way on a personal level. One brand new book that I just started reading is the David Pogue book, How to Prepare for Climate Change. And in this book, he talks about at the beginning the facts and the reality of this changing thing that we live on and what we're doing to it, and then moving into ways in which we look at mitigation versus adaptation versus all the rest of this stuff, Anyway, it looks like it's a pretty good book because you know what, ladies and gentlemen, it's coming and there ain't no way to stop it. That's the end of it. So in closing, I want to thank Sarah and Hope and Blair for jumping in, and Tatiana Tilly at the library for keeping us all going. And of course, the gang at the Red Deer Puppetry Collective, my talented friends, Dan and Ash and Mary and Maya and Suzanne. And I want you to join us next month on May 11th at the same time and same bat channel for our next conversation. And it is going to be called You Say Tomato and I Say Tomato. It's about diversity in Canada. So until next time, be safe and be smart.